Trenton 365 with Jacque Howard. Profiling the businesses, organizations, and people that make Trenton better.
Hello, friends, and welcome to another edition of the Trenton 365 Show. I'm your host, Jacque Howard. You can follow us on Twitter at Trenton 365, Facebook, Trenton 365 Show, and the website, Trenton365.com. If you're watching, it's over WPHY, Channel 25 in Mercer County, New Jersey, and you're listening over WIMG 1300 on the AM dial, also streaming over the website, WIMG 1300. In the studio with me is Caitlin Fair, who is a performing artist, activist, educator, community organizer, and probably a few other things. But we're going to get into lots of details and then let the rabbit out of the hat and talk a bit about what's going to happen in the fall when Caitlin will be joining the Trenton 365 team as a regular contributor, sharing all kinds of things about what's happening in her life. So without any further ado, Caitlin Fair, welcome back to the Trenton 365 Show.
Hi, John. Thank you.
All right. Awesome. So as you can see, folks, she's got a little bit of ink on her, which would probably let you know a little bit about who she is. And I say that because Caitlin is one of those women who is a very proud, strong woman who is making waves, but also making moves in the capital city region, and she's involved with nonprofit organizations, the social media scene, as well as the art scene as well. So I'm going to stop talking for a minute. I'd like for you to take over and tell the listening and viewing audience a bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I guess first and foremost, I always kind of describe myself as an artist because that's kind of been the springboard from which everything else that I do has flowed. So I do spoken word for the most part. I also do a little bit of visual art, collage art, stuff like that here and there. But my main medium is spoken word and poetry. So I do live performances. I've performed all over the country. And I also have a book that's a collaboration that I put together of various spoken word and poetry pieces surrounding the issues of police brutality and racism, called Poetry and Protest, and that's a compilation of my work as well as the work of some other really incredibly talented artists. So that's kind of my main gig that I do in terms of art. I also do some community organizing and activism, particularly around the issues of racism, police brutality, nationally and locally, and also addressing women's issues specifically. So those are some of the things that I'm extremely passionate about, that I really like to put at the forefront of both my artistic work and then also my organizational work. And then I also professionally work in the nonprofit world in education and mental health. So I do a lot of work around early childhood education, currently in my position as the community liaison for the Trenton Makes Words project, which is a collaboration between Children's Home Society of New Jersey, the New Jersey State Museum, and the Trenton Community Music School. It's an early childhood family engagement program to teach families with children ages 0 to 5 different ways, tools, activities to help their children increase their vocabulary and their language skills so that they're better prepared to head into kindergarten. And then I also work and I'm very passionate about mental health. So I have a community organization called the One Trenton Project, and one of the things that we do is try to connect people who are dealing with trauma, complex trauma, acute trauma, and other types of mental health issues with mental health services, amongst other things that are not mental health related that we do through One Trenton Project.
That's awesome. And I'd like for you to stick with the idea of literacy and education and drive down a little bit more on it, drill down on that a little bit more, because again, I know you do, not only you're performing as a performance artist, but also you are sharing that passion with young adults and children, not only in your spare time when you have that, but also in your professional life as well. So just talk about some of the literacy efforts that you're doing.
Yeah, so one of the things that we do with One Trenton Project is the Books and Breakfast program, which is a program that was adapted from originally from the Black Panthers Free Breakfast Program, and was turned into a national program called Books and Breakfast that essentially provides free breakfast for anyone who attends the event, and also gives out free books for children and adults. And the goal is to provide access to culturally and regionally relevant and relatable reading material for children and adults, because the idea is that anyone who could read would read if they had something that they wanted to read, right? So we talk a lot about how reading is kind of going out of style and people don't read anymore, and I don't think that that's true. I think particularly in areas like Trenton and other urban cities, that there is not a great amount of access to reading material that is intriguing or interesting to the people, or relatable to the people that live in those areas. So if you take Trenton, for example, the closest major bookstore is Barnes & Noble in Princeton. And that is not easily accessible to a lot of people in Trenton. And if you've ever been to the Barnes & Noble in Princeton and gone into the kids section, for example, and tried to find a children's book with Black characters or about anything that related to Black history or Black culture, or Latino culture with Latino characters, you would be hard pressed. So I went there one day to, my goddaughter is half Dominican and half Black, and she's 3 years old. And I went there to buy her one book for every year that she turns every year. So I bought her 3 books this year for her 3rd birthday. And I went to Barnes & Noble looking for those books, and I could not find a single book that I thought would be appropriate for her in terms of being relatable and interesting and had characters that reflected and represented who she was as a Black and Dominican little girl. And for me, I think that's crucial in reading material, is being able to feel that you're being reflected and have characters that, you can relate to, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. So that is really the aim of that program, is to provide that kind of reading material to children and adults alike and give them access to it in terms of cost and in terms of location. So we do the program in the city of Trenton. The next one is actually this coming Saturday on the 20th at the Northward Family Success Center of Children's Home Society, which is on Princeton Avenue, 1554 Princeton Avenue, right across from the KFC, if you're familiar with the area. And that will be from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m., and we'll be serving hot breakfast, giving out books. We'll have activities for the children. We'll also be likely having an adults discussion group. So what we try to do is have activities for all ages of children to participate in, and then we also like to have a discussion group for adults and young adults to participate in, that revolves around either a pressing issue in the community or in the world, or a particular topic that someone has brought up. So we bring in speakers and stuff like that to come talk to people. So that's this Saturday. And that's through my organization, One Trenton Project. And then through Children's Home Society, the New Jersey State Museum and Trenton Community Music School, we have the Trenton Makes Words Project, which isn't necessarily so much about literacy, although it's definitely related, but we work specifically with families that have kids in the age range of 0 to 5. And one of the things that has been shown through research is that the larger a child's vocabulary in those early years, even before they're verbal, right? So the more words they're exposed to when they're pre-verbal, the greater their success is later on in life through college, right? So the greater academic success that they have. So that program is geared towards giving families just various different activities that they can do in their daily lives that aren't, extra time consuming or costly, that they can build into their daily routines, like when they're at the grocery store or they're at the laundromat or they're in the kitchen cooking dinner, ways that they can engage their children in language building and vocabulary building so that they can be exposed to new words, and really strengthen their vocabularies for the time that they reach kindergarten, and make it much easier for them to begin learning how to read. So if you think about it, when you come across a word that in a book anywhere, even as adults, right? If you've heard the word before, but you've never seen the word before, it's much easier to identify that word when you look at it. But if it's a word that you've never heard before in your life, that you've never been exposed to, then it's going to be much more difficult for you to be able to read that word. So certainly the acquisition of vocabulary is related to how easy it is for us to read. So I can say for me, for example, I was very fortunate to have teachers or parents who were both teachers. My dad was a professor of constitutional law. And so you can imagine that his vocabulary is particularly extensive, and he talked to us like we were little human, like little adults. My dad doesn't do baby talk, right? So he would talk to us like we were 35 when we were like 2. So my brother and I grew up in a household where we were not only surrounded by books, but we were surrounded by adult vocabulary. And so we both grew up with people constantly telling us that the words we used were too big when we were like in elementary school. And we always felt like weirdos because we would like use these allegedly big words. And even to this day, I use words that you don't, I guess, use in everyday lexicon. And people are like, oh, wow, like that's a good word. So I deem them 10-point words. So like sometimes in conversation, even sometimes I'll surprise myself and I'll use a word and I'll be like, ooh, that's a 10-pointer. But it helped me become an artist and helped me be able to manipulate words in such a way where I could turn it into art. And so I feel very fortunate to have had that experience because I think that without it, I wouldn't have been able to do what I do in terms of my art now, which is something that is integral to who I am, right? So I really would have been, down a creek if I hadn't had that, because I wouldn't have a way to express myself. So we want to be able to give that to children who might not have parents who are professors of constitutional law, right? Because not everybody is. And some people's parents themselves can't read. And that's a reality of certain places and in certain families. And especially when you're dealing with a community that has a large immigrant population. And so we do have programming that's in multiple languages. We have groups that are almost entirely Polish. We have Spanish-speaking groups, and we have Spanish-speaking facilitators. And so part of the reason that a lot of families come is because not only are the parents trying to learn ways that they can engage their kids, even if they are not literate or they don't read well, they can still engage their kids in language building, even, without those skills. But they're also learning themselves. And a lot of the parents have expressed that they come to the groups because they're also learning English while they're, spending time engaging with their kids. So it's been very beneficial to some of our families who are not native English speakers as well, because they're given an opportunity to practice their English in a setting that, is not embarrassing or shameful or, anything like that. So that's been really cool to see too, because that was kind of an unintended outcome of the project.
And that's fascinating to me that oftentimes we don't get a chance to hear that perspective from the people who are actually in different programs or people who are in and out of living in Trenton. Oftentimes we pick up the newspaper or we hear so much negative. We don't really get a chance to hear some of the positive stories that are taking place, not only with individuals like yourself or me or a lot of the circles that we run into, but there's plenty of organizations that are doing fascinating and strong work to build a strong baseline, a foundation for families and for children as well, all with the intention and the principles of literacy is important, it helps long term, it's good for the community, etc. I just wanted to touch on a couple of things that you had mentioned. Early childhood education, and I know you've mentioned this before in conversation, about how important it is for parents or for people to read to children before they're actually formulating words or before they're actually speaking. Can you drill down on that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, even before they're actually born, children, and I think sometimes we underestimate how much children are absorbing before they're born or before they become verbal or, when we just kind of look at them and they're like a lump that just like sleeps and cries and eats, we don't realize how much, but that is the time where your brain, from a neurological and developmental perspective is doing the most developing. So that time period between the time you are born until you're about 5 years old is the most critical period in brain development that you have, and your brain grows more in that period than it will over the course of the rest of your entire life. So, we know through studies that the brain doesn't stop developing doesn't reach full maturity, so to speak, until you're in your mid to late 20s. But the most change that happens is during those first 5 years. And even in the womb, children are able to absorb what's going on in the outside world. So I know I've told you this story before, Jacque, but my nephew is 2 years old, and my brother is a journalist and a creative writer and is an avid reader. And when his wife was pregnant with their son, he would read novels to her belly. And I can't remember what novel it was reading, but it was like something so inappropriate for like a fetus. It was like I don't even remember, but my parents used to just be like, "What? Like, really? That's what you're reading?" But he would just read to her belly out loud. And now that he is alive, he's a real person now. My nephew responds to my brother reading or my brother's voice differently. And when he was an infant, before he was verbal, he would respond differently to my brother's voice than he would to my sister-in-law's. So my brother would read to him when he was an infant, and he would calm down immediately because he would recognize that voice from when he was in utero. And now he is, when I tell you, this little boy is developmentally far exceeds where he should be in terms of language at 2 years old. He speaks in complete sentences. He formulates like independent thoughts. Like he shocks us with the things that he says. And when he was 1, my brother and my dad were having a conversation about the election, and my nephew was in this phase where he was doing this thing where he would run back and forth across a room, and he would go running very fast. And he was 1 at this point. And my brother and my father were having a discussion about the election, and something came up about running unopposed. Like my brother said, running unopposed in the conversation, not to the baby, to my father. And then all of a sudden, a couple minutes later, you see my nephew running back and forth across the room going, running unopposed, running unopposed, running unopposed. And of course, he doesn't know what unopposed means, right? But when he is maybe 10 years old and actually comes across that word in a book, he's going to have access to that word. Even though at 1, he doesn't know what unopposed means, obviously, but he now has that word in his bank, right? He's banked that word. And so when he does come across it, whether it be in a book or in conversation later on in life, he will have access to that word forever now. And so that's what we say when we're talking about children absorb things. We wouldn't expect a 1 or 2 year old to know what unopposed means, but they will absorb the word and have it in their word bank, so to speak, for them to be able to access it later on in life when it is an age-appropriate word that they will be able to understand in context. So that's what we talk about when, we talk about talking to your children. Even if you don't think that they're understanding you, they're always absorbing language, always hearing you. Even we make music in a lot of our Trenton Makes Words sessions, and we have nonverbal kids who sing along, and they don't know the words to the songs, but you can very clearly hear them keeping up with the tempo and the notes, and that's their first language, right? So they're starting to develop word sounds, which will eventually turn into actual words, but just that practicing of using their voices and working the muscles in their mouths to be able to form sounds and form words is helping them, to grow and develop, and will be significant when they are ready to actually form real words. We've had kids who came to programs who were verbal but wouldn't talk in our programs at the beginning, and then by week 7 or 8, they were singing along and they were asking questions and all types of things, playing instruments, and they were like literally the first 5 sessions under the table, hiding. And, by the end of the program, they're engaged and they're talking. And I've had one of the little boys comes with his grandmother, and I happen to be friends with his dad from college, and I would send his dad videos while he was at work and pictures. And I sent him a text one day, and I said, yeah, your son was in here having a ball today. He was playing his instruments and singing, and he was like, and I was like talking up a storm, and he was like, instruments? Talking? My son doesn't talk. What are you guys doing in there that you've gotten my son to play instruments and talk? That's not his personality. That's not. And I'm like, well, when you do things repetitively and you get a child to feel comfortable in a certain situation, you can kind of get them, it's when they don't feel comfortable enough or they don't feel like that they're able to, that they don't.
Mm-hmm. It's always fascinating for me to have a conversation with you, whether we're on the air or just hanging out, because I see so many dots and initiatives getting connected by what you're doing. You've touched on so many different things, and I'm sure we won't have enough time to go into all of them. But I would like for the audience to know a bit more about you and why Trenton. I mean, your father's a constitutional lawyer, educator. Your mother's an educator. I mean, I would assume that, like many people, middle class, upper middle class, you have options. There's different places that you can go, where you can live, etc. Why Trenton?
Well, I have a very interesting backstory that's extremely complicated. But I lived actually right across the bridge in the Yardley-Morrisville area with my parents until I was about 14 years old. And then at 14, there were circumstances that forced me to move out of my home. And I moved in with my best friend and her family who lived in Trenton, lived in Wilbur Section. And
now, I want to stop you there because Wilbur Section, for the folks who don't know, is an area that has been and is challenged. But there's a lot of work that's taking place. There's a lot of wonderful people who are doing amazing things who've come from the Wilbur section. But just like a lot of post-industrial cities, there are pockets that are just challenged areas for lots of different things. Redlining comes to mind. For those of you who don't know, just do an internet search for redlining communities and you'll understand what I'm talking about. But we'll get into that at a later date. But the Wilbur section is a challenged portion of Trenton when it's in between Trenton Central High School. It's right on Route 33, a state road, and Chambers Street. And it's just a few blocks from the main police station. So you often...
And the train station.
And the train station. So you have to have questions in your mind like, well, how can this absolutely possibly happen this way? And again, look up redlining, just do a Wikipedia or internet search for that. But again, you moved at the age of 14 with a friend's family in the Wilbur section, which is this challenged area in Trenton. And obviously, you fell in love with it.
Yeah, I did. So, I mean, challenged is one of the most PC ways to talk about Wilbur section. And
that's one of the things I do.
And I use that term myself because I don't like what other terms bring to mind for other people.
Yes.
For me, the way I would describe it in my own conversation in my head would not be challenged.
Exactly.
There would be some other words that would come to mind, but those words have different connotations for other people when you say them. So anyway, yes, Wilbur section is very challenged, but it's an amazing place with amazing, amazing people. And for all intents and purposes, I feel like Wilbur section raised me. There were a lot of interesting dynamics in the home that I was living in at that time, and there wasn't a lot of supervision, not a lot of parental guidance, and so it was really kind of a bunch of kids, teenagers, just kind of
growing up,
just growing up. And it was, I think, one of the most difficult periods of my life, but also one of the most rewarding periods of my life, because I really feel like it shaped much of who I am and gave me a very unique worldview and perspective that not a lot of people are privileged to have. And I look at that as a privilege, very much so.
I want to stop you there, and I want to back up and talk about my personal experience growing up. And at the time, it was considered a rural area of Ewing Township, just off of Eggert's Crossing Road in Ewingville Road. And growing up in a family where I was the youngest of 7, 2 doors down was my great aunt, 3 doors down were my maternal grandparents, and the term teenager growing up. And when I think about my time, my early teens, there was a lot of freedom. There was a lot of things that were taking place that I'm sure if most people knew about, they'd say, oh my God, how can this absolutely be taking place? These kids are unsupervised, et cetera, et cetera. Now that I'm almost 50, and I think back to my childhood, and I'm in constant conversation with people who I grew up with, and I see that is a perspective of life in America. But it's not isolated. Mm-hmm. So the experience that you had in Wilbur section, although the dynamics may have been different, it's very similar to what latchkey children all over the United States had to deal with, and it's part of the systemic issues that we're having here in the country, where you've got both parents who need to work. Mm-hmm. So now you've got children who there's no after school program. So now these kids are home, and then hey, if the boys are with the girls, and then all these other things could happen, etc. So I just want to make that clear for folks. I don't want you to think that okay, boo-hoo, this is an inner city problem. No. This is the United States. I mean, our system has set up to the point where their kids are free to do whatever they need to do, or to grow up, or to survive on their own in some capacity. So that's one of the reasons why I believe that we have a lot of issues and things that we have in our society. But I'd like to jump a bit, because I know that we're going to end up running out of time. I'm waiting for Lady Essence to give me the cards over there. So you chose Trenton, but it was probably more along the lines of Trenton became a location that was more of a, I don't want to say a holding area, but almost like took you in.
Yeah. When I talk about this with people, I kind of put it I frame it in a way where I describe Trenton as like a person. So I feel as though Trenton has given me a lot, almost like as if a person would give you something, right? And so I feel as though, based on what I was given by Trenton, and in terms of resources, in terms of experiences, in terms of perspective, in terms of all these things that really helped me become who I am, I feel like I owe something to Trenton from what it's given me. And I see so much potential in Trenton, and I see so much potential in so many of the wonderful, amazing people in Trenton who get looked over, and who are written off, and who are judged. Some of my very, very, very dearest friends, in fact, one of my best friend just came home from prison today. And a lot of people who don't share the life experience that I have look at some of the people that I spend the majority of my time with and are very confused by it, and they don't understand why I choose to fraternize with the people that I do, because they don't see the value in those people, because they don't spend time with them. And so, I know a lot of amazing people who have made a lot of really terrible mistakes and continue to make stupid decisions and mistakes, but that doesn't mean that they're still not amazing, wonderful, loving, caring people. And I love having them in my life. And I want Trenton to be a place that takes care of those people as well as everybody else, because this city is very unique in the sense of all of the people that it houses. It is such a spectrum of people who spend majority of their time here, whether it's that they live here or they work here or whatever the case may be. And it's very stratified, right? No one ever interacts. The different groups never interact. And I think that's a shame, because I think there's so much that everyone can learn from each other. And I think there are people who write off certain parts of the population in Trenton as never being a population that they could learn something from or that has anything valuable to offer. And I feel like it's my mission, because a lot of those people in that population have been the people who have given me so much. So I want other people to be able to experience that.
Yeah, and just before we go to the break, I'd like to finish up with that comment, because again, I'm almost at that mark of 50 years old, so there's a lot of reflection that's taking place. And I think back to the people who I've grown up with, spent time with, the people who look like me, the ones who don't, the ones who have the same interest I do, who don't. And what I see is the difference between the people that you're describing in Trenton and Wilbur section that you grew up with, who may have made bad choices and decisions and been incarcerated. Yes, there are mistakes. Yes, there's sometimes they just chose that path. And hey, it's just like everyone else. They're choosing a path. Mm-hmm. Now, I think back to some of the people who I know personally who have done illegal things, but their parents were able to supply the proper attorney so that they didn't have to go to prison, or they weren't incarcerated, or they didn't lose their license, or the house party where a child got sick from drinking, it was just swept under the rug because of the position that this person had. Literally the polar opposite of that. You're talking about a whole family dynamic that is now changed because of the same exact choice. Mm-hmm. So I think that it behooves us to think about how we look at our culture, communities, society,
generational poverty,
the world, when we start saying, hey, look, with this technological advances that we're having with the internet and everything, look, we all cut and bleed the same exact way. Mm-hmm. A life is a life. Mm-hmm. And we'll be back after a short break. You're listening and watching the Trenton 365 show. I'm your host, Jacque Howard. I'm with Caitlin Fair, and we'll be back after a short break.
Men and women in war zones live with the possibility of dying every day. Our troops long for assurance about eternity. You can provide it through the Military Bible Stick, an audio New Testament with real hope for our heroes.
It allows me to hear the word and keep a strong faith in a dark place.
Through tough times, the Bible gives me a message of hope and love and better days to come.
Many nights while I'm out at my post, when frustration and depression set in, I can turn on the Military Bible Stick and find solace.
Give this powerful gift to those risking everything for you. $25 provides the Military Bible Stick for one troop to use anytime, anywhere. Make a life-changing difference for a hero. Visit militarybiblestick.com.
Adopt US Kids presents